This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so this is going to be the last recording for the Greek 2, so the noun system. Tonight we're going to talk about demonstrative pronouns, and we're also, so that's chapter 13. We're also going to do chapter 14. This material is not terribly different from things that you already know. He does kind of point out here that demonstrative pronouns are kind of like adjectives, and they have some roles where they're like adjectives. But most of the things we're going to be covering are simply applying the rules that we already know in a new way. So there are two demonstratives. So there's the this, these type demonstrative, and there's also the that, those type demonstrative. This is used for things that are near. This is used for things that are far. And sometimes these are called the near demonstrative and the far demonstrative. Okay? Not inflected for case or gender. So the point he's trying to show here is this and that can both refer to, can be used as pronouns or as adjectives. So it can be used as it is here in the first sentence, that is mine. So it's replacing something out there. So maybe it's a book. That is mine. It can also be used as an adjective to add specificity to something else. So that car is mine. That book is mine. That truck is mine. In these situations, it's not replacing anything, it's modifying something else. Okay? In Greek, there are two demonstratives, sort of in the same way. You have hutos and akenos. And I pointed this out, I think, in last year's stuff. Ake, this helps you remember it. Ake means there. So it implies some distance. Akenos is going to be the far demonstrative. Hutos is the near demonstrative. So this / these, that / those. As I already mentioned, you've got a K there buried in the word. The paradigm for hutos, you're going to see here quite a few similarities to the regular paradigm with a couple key differences. As we've shown before in some of the autos paradigm, the nominative and accusative neuter do not have the new at the end. So that's one thing that's a little bit different than the regular paradigm. The rest of this you can look at and you can see it's basically what we've already learned. So hutos, tutu, tuto, tuton, that's the masculine, aute, tautes, taute, tautain, tuta, tutu, tuto, tuta. So the big thing that you need to remember, or a couple of big things, no tau in the masculine and feminine singular, and then no new in the nominative and accusative. The rest of it basically follows the normal paradigm. When we get to the plural, sort of the same thing. You have no tau. The rest of it follows the paradigm as we would normally see. Akenos, same thing. No new in the neuter. Everything else completely regular. So not terribly complicated, just some new words. Some notes here about translation. Whenever you have the demonstrative, there's sometimes going to be implied in translation that is going to be masculine or feminine just based on which part of the paradigm you're using. So going back, if you look here, so this would by definition be those, so either women or those feminine, whatever. So it's going to have at least some degree of specificity just based on the word itself. So what Malins is pointing out here is that sometimes you're going to want to add either women or man, or maybe one if it's neuter, or maybe even thing or things if it's neuter. Okay. So this is an example of it being used adjectivally. Whenever it's functioning as an adjective, it uses the same rules of adjectives that we learned before and takes the predicate position. So, houtos ha anthropos, so that would be this man. Oi anthropoi ekenoi, that would be, I guess the best way to do that one was, that is that man. All right, the vocative. So we've talked about the 4 cases. Technically, there are 5 cases in Greek. The reason why we call them 4 cases is because in form, they are almost always exactly the same as the nominative case, but with a few exceptions, one of them being the masculine singular. There are a few times whenever you can tell whenever you are using the vocative. The most common time that gets brought up is this particular word here, which is Kyrie, Kyrie, or it's Lord, Lord is the most common time you see this used in the New Testament anyway. And it's the form that you use whenever you're addressing somebody. Now, you can see here what it looks like, and we're going to go through a couple things to show it to you. Most of the time, you're going to be able to tell what this is because it's going to be set off with whatever the word is and then a comma in a direct quote. So if you have a parsing question about a particular word in a sentence and you can't quite figure it out, if it looks a little bit different than what you're used to and it starts the sentence, that's more than likely going to be where you're going to find a vocative. So you can see suke, anthrope, pater. So you've got that here, but you wouldn't really know that this one was different because it's not any different than its normal nominative. It shows up every once in a while. You have in English a positive statement, which is when you're describing something, and then the next stage of that is the comparative, and then beyond that is the superlative. So the whole big, bigger, biggest. Here, large, larger, largest, or meges, meson, megistos. Something that Mounce points out is that by the time the Bible is being written, the superlative is no longer being widely used. It does come up a few times in the New Testament, but not very often. Most of the time, the comparative form is being used in such a way that it has the same function as the superlative form. So if you can tell that there's obviously 3 things or more being compared and it still uses the comparative form, you still are going to want to translate it as an EST type adjective. Even if you only see it in the comparative form, it may be functioning as this form does traditionally. Outside of the New Testament, especially older things, you will see this formation. He mentions crassus, which is whenever it's kind of like a contraction in English. So this word kago is what happens when you have chi plus ego, and you get kago. And kago means and I. He does point out here that they are separate vocabulary words, but you will see a handful of these. They're not always, you won't necessarily have a vocabulary word for all of these because they're not terribly common. But sometimes, even if you don't know what the word is, you'll be able to figure it out because of the two words that make it up. So, kago. This is the word palus. Palus means much or many. The thing that he's pointing out here with palus is that it is a word that has a fluctuating number of lambdas. So you can see here that here you have 2. And it's the only, sorry, here and here you have 2. The thing that he's pointing out is that this is actually going to be your stem. I guess this would be your stem. Having the 2 lambdas is the normal, and it's dropped out. This is an upsilon class adjective. And you can see it has a lot of similarities to the regular paradigm, but the omicron in several places has been replaced by an upsilon. And then it goes back to the omicron in plural. There is a way to show how this happened. If anyone's interested, send me an email and I'll explain it. But it's really easier just to memorize that in the singular, you have here, 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 and here, where's an upsilon. All right, so like I said, not a terribly difficult set of things to learn. Hutas, akenos. You have gender and number by antecedent. Case is based on the function. Whenever it's in an adjective, case, number, gender, and in the predicate position. So the vocative is basically the nominative with the exception of that nominative singular masculine has an epsilon at the end. And we talked about degrees, crassus, and palus. All right, so vocabulary for chapter 13. Gune. Gune means woman or wife, depending on the context, and this is the word we get gynecology from. Remember, an upsilon, when it's transliterated, often becomes a Y. Dikaiosune. Dikaiosune means righteousness. Dodeca. Dodeca means 12. This is a bit of a stretch, but if you look here, do is kind of like dos, which is 2. Dec means 10. So 2 plus 10 is 12. EA2.
This conference will now be recorded.
EA2 is the reflexive pronoun. So that's like himself, herself, itself, that sort of thing. Themselves, all of those. Akenos is the one we've already talked about. Akenos means that, in the plural means those. A So A means or, and make sure you don't confuse this with hey. Okay, so A means or, it can also mean either. Yeah, if you ever are writing and you're just kind of translating top to bottom, and all of a sudden you have a these stuck somewhere that doesn't make sense, this is what you've probably done, is failed to see that this is a smooth breathing. Kago, as we talked about, is and I. Makarios. It's the word that is usually translated blessed, like in the Beatitudes. That's what this word is. You probably heard that it can also mean happy or joyful, something like that. Megas, megale, mega means large. Police means city. This is where we get our word like, well, the suffix like metropolis. Palus, palais, palu, we learned just a minute ago. It means much. In the plural, it usually means many. Singular. And one other thing is it can function as an adverb, and whenever it does, it means often. Pos means how. This is weird, but I've always thought for some reason this word kind of looks like how. So if you make this bigger, it worked for me. It may not work for you. Semeon. Semeon means sign. And this is actually the word same. This prefix is where we get symptom from. If that helps you remember it. Which I just realized, I guess that means whenever we talk about signs and symptoms of a disease, it's kind of redundant. All right, last chapter for this semester is chapter 14, which covers the relative pronoun. So the big issue is really just getting straight in your head the difference between the relative pronoun and the interrogative pronoun. And the reason why this is kind of difficult is that in English, these are the same word. So who, that, and which are our relative pronouns. Generally, who refers to people, whose is primarily personal, and it's possessive. which tends to be neuter. That can be any of them. As a general rule, though, if you're referring to people, you use who. Whenever you're referring to things, you use which. I don't like using that in our translations because we already have a word that means or can mean that. So to keep them straight, I recommend using who and which. Now, if you were to use that in a translation, I wouldn't count you wrong because it's not wrong, but it, to me, is more confusing. And as I've talked about before, whenever I do translating and translation for myself and for preaching and so forth, I try to be consistent with what the Greek represents. That way people will know if they were to look, whenever I use that word, it's going to, in most cases, relate back to a specific word in Greek. Okay. Once again, these are not interrogatives. So a relative clause, the pronoun is the first word in a dependent clause. So the example he uses here is, come to me, whoever is thirsty, and I will give you a drink. It usually modifies a noun and can function as a substantive. So this whole sentence or clause in and of itself could act like a noun. Okay. So which person? The whoever is thirsty. I guess I should blank it off this way. It's talking, yeah, I guess I didn't see that. This is talking particularly about this clause. Okay. All right. Once again, whoever is last, this whole thing can act like a noun. All right, so our paradigm for the relative pronoun, you can see here, is basically you just take the endings and put a rough breathing on it. That's what it is. The bigger thing is over here, these translations. So who, which, that, as I said, I would argue for which over here too, depending on the exact context. And then of whom, or of which, or of whose, and then to whom, and to which. So no one really says to that. So that's virtually always going to be wrong. And then whom, which, and like I said, I would stick with which. Same thing in the plural. All right. Number and gender is determined by antecedent, the way we've been doing pronouns all the way through. Case by the function inside the relative clause. So it's going to be whatever way it's functioning here. Okay. And then he does make this note here, and I think this is important. No one's ever going to fault you for doing this. If the sentence is no longer clear in English because you don't have the noun endings to tell you exactly what's being modified, replace the relative pronoun with the actual word that it's referring to. So in here, whom we saw would be our relative clause. All right. So he's broken it down into clauses. So has u labane ton staron autu kai oke akulese Ap isso mu, uk estin mu axios.
This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry about that. I had to check and make sure I was saying something right. All right. So it's not related to the actual lesson we're supposed to be learning. Just make sure I knew the right word. All right. So we have this clause that he's kind of put here off to its side. So it's whoever here, whoever labane. So it's whoever does not, lambano means to take or receive. In this particular situation, it's take up. Take up his, how to cross, staron, and akalufe apizo mu. So akalufe is from akaletheo, which is where we get the word acolyte from, which means it's somebody who follows someone around. So this word means follow. Apizo is the thing I want to make sure I had right. So it follows behind me. Uk estin mu axios, is not worthy is the best way to translate axios, is not worthy of me. So you can see here, this entire thing is dependent because it starts with has. So whoever does not take up his cross and follow behind me. If you took away the whoever, and change it to, I guess, like the one, it would not be able to, I guess this particular one still wouldn't be able to stand alone. The point of it is that this whole thing functions like a noun. Okay, so which one? The whoever is not willing to take up his cross. Okay. They can modify who, which, or that, the man who is sitting at the table. Function, possibly add words if used substantively. He who takes up his cross. So the big thing, keep the clause together, as I showed you, put it all as one group. It will never contain the main subject or verb. Okay, it's going to be something dependent. It's going to be a clause that's separate. It's not going to have the main verb. And his technique is called phrasing. So whenever you're doing phrasing is whenever you kind of break the sentence down to its component parts. And his tip is to take whatever is the antecedent and put it beside the clause that's referring to it. All right, this is what we just talked about. Okay, so after we do this vocabulary, we'll have 169 words, and unless I copied this thing at the wrong spot, we'll have 169 words, which, as you can see here, is 2/3 of the Greek New Testament vocabulary. That's quite a bit. All right, so aletheia. Aletheia means truth. Eirene. Eirene means peace. Enopion. Enopion, you're usually going to see it translated as before. I have seen it translated as therefore in certain cases, but before is the most accepted way to use this. Apangalia. Apangalia is the word for promise. an interesting thing is that in modern Greek, evangelia is the word for an engagement ring. Hepta. Hepta means 7. That's where we get like a heptagon. So that's where that comes from. Thronos. Thronos, as you can kind of figure, it's a throne. There's a few places where you can mean chair, but usually this is the word that's used for throne. Jerusalem. Jerusalem means Jerusalem. Kata is one of the prepositions, so I'm not going to have you don't have to memorize it. In the genitive, though, it means against. In the accusative, it means according to. In Ephesians, Paul uses kata in the accusative a whole lot. Kephale. Kephale means head. I don't know if you've ever heard this word, but the concept of cephalic has to do with head. So if you've ever seen the word hydrocephalus, that's a disease where you have water in your head. We usually worry about it most in babies and that sort of thing. It's where your cerebrospinal fluid doesn't drain correctly is usually what causes it. Hadass. Hadass, I think the way that it's usually translated is way, but most of the time it's used as, most people translate it path. If you remember at the beginning of Mark, whenever it's talking about the proclamation that John the Baptist is making, where he says, make his path straight, this is the word that's being used. Has, hey, ha, as we've talked about this whole lesson, is a relative pronoun. Hate. Hate is when. And as they point out, don't confuse hate with hati, which is I kind of alluded to in the lesson, usually means that or because. Hustos, hustos means thus. Sometimes it means so or in this way. Ployon. Ployon, one of my favorite words, is boat. Rhema. Rhema, it's a different word for word. Without going in depth on this, I will tell you that this word is a lot of times contrasted with logos in John's writings. So it seems to be a point of emphasis that whenever John is referring to the logos, he's referring to Jesus. And that's whenever we do readings from John, which I think we are going to do at some point, maybe this upcoming summer, we'll talk about that more. Te I usually see people put yet as the most direct translation for this. It really can be yet and so. The actual meaning of it is a post-positive conjunction of weaker intensity than chi, whatever that means. Chir, kairos, is the word for hand. This is where we get the word chiropractor from. And last but not least, psyche. Psyche, usually we translate it as soul. It can also mean life. In certain situations, it can mean heart. That will do it for this lecture. This is the last regular lecture for this semester. We're going to put up a review lecture, which will cover all the major topics that you need to know for the final exam. The final exam is comprehensive, and I'm not going to lie, it's kind of long, but I've gone out of my way to make it longer and easier rather than shorter and harder. So it may take a while, but there shouldn't be anything on it that you don't feel comfortable with.